Looking at the spec sheet, GTX 1070 Ti has more in common with the 1080 than it does with the 1070. It has the same core clock, the same TDP, just a touch fewer CUDA cores, and in fact, all it has in common with the 1070 is the name and memory configuration. Even visually, it's almost identical to a GTX 1080 Founders Edition. Same cooler, same shroud, same overall length and width, same power connector. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this card feels more like a binned 1080 with cheaper GDDR5 rather than GDDR5X memory. The latest Titan killer from Nvidia. Turned it up to 11 with the GTX 1080 Ti, the Founders Edition flavor of which they've sent over for our evaluation. It's got 11 gigs of GDDR5X memory at 11 gigabit per second. I see what they did there. Which is 1 gigabyte less than the Titan XP, but at a higher speed to substantially increase memory throughput. Good thing too, because we go from a 384-bit memory bus down to 352-bit. It has the same number of CUDA cores at 3,584, and while they share the same transistor count of 12 million, the 1080 Ti's cores boost up to a rated 1582 MHz instead of 1531. So far, so good. But what the 1080 Ti lacks compared to the Titan XP, and I mean, aside from the DVI port that they ditched in favor of more exhaust room for the fan, is ROPs. I mean, to be clear, it has them, just fewer. We go from 96 down to 88.
The Nvidia GTX 1060 may just be the new mass consumer workhorse card that replaces the 970. So yes, the GTX 1060 is here, and with it comes a fancy new Pascal GPU named GP106. A step down from the GP104 sporting GTX 1080 and 1070s, but still with a lot of the goodies and performance improvements which come with being on the Pascal platform at all. The biggest story here, however, is how it will fare against AMD's offering, the RX 480. This is the first time there has been a Pascal GPU launched since the 480 was released. So that makes it interesting. 1060 features 1,280 CUDA cores, a boost clock of 1,708 MHz, 6 gigs of GDDR5 VRAM, which is clocked at 8 gigabit per second, and an overall memory bandwidth of 192 gigabytes per second. And all of that is wrapped up in a TDP package of only 120 watts. We'll see how all of this translates to performance later on. Next, let's have a look at the all-new cooler design. It's clearly related design-wise to the cooler found on the Founders Edition of the 1070 and 1080, but has some core differences, like no backplate, an Nvidia logo that doesn't light up, a physical extension beyond the PCB to house the fan, a slightly relaxed angularity design, and no window to look into the heatsink fans for. The die-cast aluminum body also contains 2 copper heat pipes embedded into the base of an aluminum heatsink. But what this card doesn't have, to much surprise, is an SLI connector. Now, Nvidia's official statement on this, more or less, is that if you want more performance, you should just buy a 1070 or 1080 instead of 2 1060s, citing that they would rather focus their support on SLI setups for those cards instead.
The RADEON RX 580 is one of the best graphics options currently available from AMD outside of Vega. Let's take a quick look at the card itself, starting with the front. There's this rubber texture covering the whole thing, and an air intake fan towards the end. It's a blower-style cooler, so the air is all pushed out through the rear. On the back, the whole board is exposed with no backplate, and toward the end we can see that the fan sort of hangs off over the edge of the card, making it longer, presumably for more cooling space. On the rear of the card we can see that it takes up 2 PCIe slots, and features 1 HDMI port and 3 DisplayPort 1.4 outputs. There's also some exhaust vents for the outgoing air. As for the specs, it's got 2,304 stream processors, 8GB of GDDR5 memory, a base clock speed of 1257 MHz, and a boost speed of 340 MHz. AMD recommend a 500 watt power supply, and note that the card will typically draw around 185 watts. And I've tested the temperatures with an ambient room temperature of 24 degrees Celsius, though this would likely be much better using a custom 580 with a better cooling solution, rather than this reference blower style option. Just for fun, I've also had a look at the temperatures of the card using my thermal camera. At idle, the hottest area on the back gets up to around 43 degrees Celsius, while under full load, the back seems to get a little hotter than the GPU core temperatures noted earlier, getting up to around 92. Unfortunately, I didn't measure the overall system volume at idle, but under full load we can see that it gets very loud, up to around 68 decibels, and here's how that sounds. While testing, I didn't notice any coil whine with my particular unit, although I admit it would be a challenge to hear through that fan noise. Pricing is where things get interesting. As you may have heard, the prices of graphics cards are fairly inflated due to cryptocurrency miners buying them up, as the AMD cards typically perform better at this task compared to the Nvidia options. Custom 580 cards currently seem to start at around $460 and go up from there. And it's difficult to say whether that's worth it, as I've got no idea if the prices will go down anytime soon or continue trending upwards.
The Nvidia GTX 1070 is sure to be a hit card, as it follows in the 970's footsteps numerically and has an aggressive price point of $449 for the Founders Edition and $379 for the custom versions that will come later. First, let's start with specs. The GTX 1070 is the second card in their new Pascal lineup, and it features a GP104 chip with 1920 CUDA cores compared to the 1080's 2560, and runs at a boost clock of 1683 MHz compared to the 1080's 1733 MHz. It also features the nice new 16nm process. Unlike the GTX 1080's shiny new GDDR5X memory, the 1070 is still sporting GDDR5, but is claiming the title of the world's fastest version of said memory, as well as running out of the box at 8 gigabit per second. That paired with the new memory compression algorithm, which gives you effectively 20% additional bandwidth, results in 8 gigs of some pretty damn fast GDDR5. Seemingly Deus Ex-inspired Shroud features a similar aesthetic to the silver and black Shrouds with blower-style fans that Nvidia has been using for the past few generations, but with more angles this time around. Connectivity is good, as it features HDMI 2.0 for 4K at 60 Hz, 3 DisplayPort 1.4 connectors for 4K at 120 Hz, or 8K at 60 Hz, holy crap, and dual-link DVI.